Hey folks, Eugene here and welcome to another video. Today what I thought I would be trying is meshing inside of FARO scene. A lot of people want to take a point cloud that they capture with different devices and then have it turn into a mesh so that they can use it in other programs. And so today what I thought I would do is take a Recon 3D scan, bring it into FARO scene and show you what some of the options are inside of scene and how you can modify the mesh to make it either a higher resolution mesh, a lower resolution mesh, and how to improve your textures and things like that. So let's give it a go and I'll walk you through basically starting from scratch. Now, some of you don't have FARO scene, and so I understand, this might be not important to you, but I know that there are a lot of users using FARO scene, and so this may be helpful. Okay, so we are inside of FARO scene here. This is the latest version, 2023.1. And the first thing we need to do is create a project. So in order to do that, there's a button right up here. Okay, it says create project. I'm going to click on that. And then we need to pick a location, like where we're going to be writing the default folder, and then give the folder a name. So what I'm going to be doing here is I've already got the default path. So that's okay. And then over here, I'm going to call this old Renault. And that's because that's what I have. I've got a scan of an old Renault vehicle that I picked up while I was in Europe. And I'm just going to go ahead and click on create project. So when we get to the next screen, it says project and there's nothing here. So it's all empty and it doesn't say anything here. No big deal. Really what we need to do is just import the E57 file. Now across the top here there are a number of tabs and one of them is the import tab. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to get to my folder. Here it is, and I'll just show you what I've got. So basically I've got this old Renault right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that in. And if I drag it over this big circle, okay, it changes. And I can actually drag and drop this inside. And then it says, hey, successfully imported one file. Now, in truth, if I delete this, and I'll just do this again, I could be on any of these tabs. So importing works by dragging and dropping on any screen. So let's just do it here as well. Let me bring this up. If I take the old Renault and I drag it and let it go here, you'll see that it also says successfully imported one file. So no big deal. I'm just going to go okay. So that was the import, and then there's this processing tab. So the old Renault right now, if I try to open it, it says, hey, this is an E57 file. There's going to be a bunch of things that don't work. So this is like the raw E57 file. You can see when I move it around, it has missing pieces and stuff like that. So opening it up this way is not efficient inside of FARO scene. So one of the things that I like to do is convert it to a scan point cloud. And so in order to do that, you have to go to the processing tab and then click on this process scans. Now, the scan point cloud format is an optimized format inside of FARO scene. So it'll actually run a little bit better in situations where you have a really big point cloud. This is a relatively small file, so it's not going to make that big of a difference. But let's go ahead and run through the process just the same. So I hit on that process scans. Now I only have one scan in this case. If I had a whole bunch, I could just click on the whole scan folder and it would do everything inside of this folder. But I've only got one, so I'm just going to highlight that one and go configure processing. So the only thing that I need to do in this particular case, because it's an E57 file, is really just create the scan point cloud. Okay, so that's the optimized format, and I'm just going to shut everything else off. Okay, I don't want any targets, I don't want any filters, and there's not going to be an option for registration because I only have one scan. I need at least 2 scans in order to do any kind of registration. So I'm just going to go ahead and say, yeah, start processing. And let this go ahead. So it'll basically load up all the data. It's going to optimize it. And you can see that it was done pretty quick. So that's great. That was fast. And here now, when I double click on this, you'll see that I've got the model now. And you notice that it doesn't have the same sort of effect when I'm moving this around. Okay? You can see that everything is shown and it doesn't lose points in the viewer. So that's good too. Now, this particular file has got some gaps up on the top here, and I want that to actually be the case because I want to show you a couple of things of what you can do in order to close those gaps when you do some meshing. So now that I have the optimized scan point cloud that's in here, I can go right away to meshing. So I'm going to skip the registration tab and go right to explore. And I need to make a selection. So if I want to select this scan, it's the only thing that's in the view. So I'm just going to go Control A. Okay. If I hit Control A on the keyboard, what'll happen is it will highlight. And that means that, this whole point cloud is selected. So now that I've got this highlighted, the mesh selection pops up here. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to go through this several times and we're going to try a number of things. We're going to change some of the settings and see what the cause and effect is going to be here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on mesh selection. All right. And we get this window up here. So now you'll see that I've got a few sections here. It's got the mesh name, so I could change that. I'll leave that right now. And it asks me, gap filling. Do I want it to be watertight or do I want it to be non-watertight? Then it asks me to perform smoothing if I want to check that on or no. And then I have a slider here as well. It also says color generation, generate texture or generate vertex colors. And finally, I've got the maximum number of triangles that's down here. So I've got a number of options, and let's go through what these typically mean. So very briefly, gap filling. So watertight meshes are meshes that are often used, for example, like 3D printing or something like that. And the idea is that you're not going to have any holes in your point cloud. So that starting data, okay, needs to be closed, completely closed, or at least it's able to close with very small spaces between the points. Now, if I go back to this mesh here, let me get rid of the highlight here. The default or the hotkey is going to be Control D, and it gets rid of the selection. You see that I've got gaps on the windows. If I go underneath, I've got a big hole that's here, right? That wasn't filled. There's just openings here and here. So there's a lot of problems with this particular mesh. If I try to make this a watertight mesh, I'm going to have some problems. Okay. It's going to give me all kinds of artifacts and weird sorts of things. So that's typically not what I do. So we might just skip that. If you want to try it, you'll see that you get something really weird. But I'm not going to try it in this particular case. Okay. Okay. Let me go back and try this again. I'm going to go Control A and select everything and then go back to the mesh. So we're going to go non-watertight. And you see that there's a slider here. So if I go all the way up here, basically what it's going to do is it's going to try and reach across some of the gaps between the points and try to fill those in. Now, if I go too much, it's going to look really bubbly, let's say. Okay, it's not going to look like a nice smooth mesh that's following the contour of the point cloud. I'm going to get some funny things happening between the gaps. So I don't want to go too big. And on the other hand, I don't want to go too small. If I go too small, well, it's not going to create the patches that I need. So usually this ends up being somewhere around, 30 something. So let's just try 30. And that will probably leave a few little gaps, but it depends on your point cloud and how full it is. So let's try that. I'm not going to perform any smoothing right now. I will generate texture, and I'm going to leave the default here for the number of triangles that it's going to target to produce, okay? So the maximum number. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Create. It's going to do its thing. And then what we'll do is we'll look at how complete the mesh is and, we'll note any gaps or any holes. Then we'll try it again with a larger value so that it will close more of those gaps, okay? This is going to take a little bit. I'm just going to pause and then we'll come right back when it's done. Okay, this has just finished, so I'm going to click OK, and you'll see that I've got these gizmos up here. So these gizmos are controllers for me to move the mesh, and when it starts, or its initial position, is exactly over top of the point cloud. So I need to slide this over. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to slide this over here. I'll get that out of the way. Now let me go and inspect this here. So you'll see that, the mesh doesn't look too bad. All right, not too bad, but it does have some gaps here. Okay, so I was expecting some of this, and that kind of makes sense, but not too bad. Also, I use the default number of triangles or patches, so I'm going to right-click on this, And I'm going to go wireframe, and you'll see what the patches look like. So that's what the arrangement of all these triangles are on this particular vehicle. Okay, so not too bad. I'm going to go ahead and just shut off the wireframe. And let's try this again. So this is a good example, okay? This is of the, sort of the ability to close the gaps here. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to go mesh selection, and we're going to crank this up a bit. So let me go to like 55. Let's say I don't want to go too much because then other stuff starts to happen. But let's try 55 and see if we can close some of those gaps again. I'm going to leave all the other settings the same. I don't want to change anything else. And again, this is on watertight, but let's go ahead and hit create. And again, let's let this cook. I'm going to come back and show you the difference, and we'll put them side by side. Okay, so this one is now done. So I'm going to click OK. And again, same thing with the gizmo. I'm just going to take this and drag it over here so we get like a little side by side. And let's see, let's have a look. I'm going to go here, have a look. And right off the bat, you can see that I've filled most of the gaps that are here. Okay, so this one here was the first one. We were set at about 30 something. And then this one we set to 55. And you can see that there's a big difference between the two. And that's the non-watertight slider just by moving it up to about 55. So 55 seems to be a pretty good number. I could probably play with that a bit more, but let's leave that there. And what I want to do is let's just keep these off to the side because I'm going to be doing a couple more. And we want to make some space for a couple more here. So let's go to the mesh selection once more. So I'm going to leave this on 55 right now. And I don't want to make this too big. I guess I could show you what happens here if I go all the way. Actually, why not? If I go way too far on the other end, let's say I go to like 90, 85. Let me go to like, I can even type it in here, just 90. Why not? Let's do this and let's have a look. So let me go ahead and create. And while that's cooking, we'll see what happens and what it looks like when we get back. Okay, this one is done. Let me drag this one over like that. And again, we had this up really high. So you see, I'm getting all kinds of weird stuff happening here. So you definitely don't want to go too high on that gap filling thing. It's causing all kinds of weird things happening. So you got to make sure your scans are like really clean. You see, it's actually trying to wrap around the bottom too. So definitely not a good plan. I am going to do one more here, and that is what happens if you turn it down. So let's say I go all the way down to like something like 5. Let me just type that in there and leave everything else the same. If we go on the high end, it's trying to reach farther, like between the points to try and create a mesh. But if you keep it down really low, well, then it's not going to reach as far. So I expect I'm going to get a lot of gaps or maybe just some very sparse surfaces. Let's pause it here, and then when it's done, we'll come back. Okay, that one is done too. Let me move it over here. All right. Well, actually, you can see I hardly have anything. I've got these tiny little patches, so that's way, way too aggressive. I don't even have anything. You see, I just got like little floating little patches here, so that was kind of a waste of time. But I think it makes the point. If you make it too small, well, then it doesn't reach as far as it needs to from one point to the other. So obviously the scan resolution or the density is going to be important to know here. So these are all the options. So this one, the first one, this is a non-watertight mesh. We did it about 35, and you see we've got some gaps in the top. The next one was 55, and we got some, few little gaps, but not as much. Obviously, it filled in a lot. And then over here, we went really high. We went like 90, I think it was, somewhere in that area. And then all of a sudden, it starts reaching way too far and getting some weird stuff happening. And if we go on the other end and we turn it really, really small, we don't get much at all. It's just way, way too small. So you can experiment with this when you're creating a mesh and, mess around with the different options. But let's move forward and try a couple of other things here. So I'm going to go back to the mesh select, and I'm going to leave this on 55. I like that before. And we're going to try the perform smoothing. So I didn't have this checked before, and we are going to compare it to this guy over here, okay, because that's the 55 with no smoothing. But let's go ahead and we're going to crank this up a bit. Let's say I go to 4 and leave everything else the same. Let's give it a try. So I'm just going to go ahead and say create. And so I expect that if I had fine little geometric details, bumps and little things like that, it's going to try and smooth those out. So in some cases, you know, that might be helpful if you had like a wall or something was coming out, maybe not so great. Maybe smoothing may help. I don't know. But let's have a look when this comes back and we'll go from there. Okay, that one's done. Let's organize this a little bit differently. What we're going to do is we're going to park this guy in the front here. And we're going to take this guy here for comparison purposes and put it side by side. So let me go ahead and go in here. So this one here, we had no smoothing. This was non-watertight with a setting of 55. And now we go here. That doesn't look too bad. That doesn't look too bad. I'm just looking at it right now, trying to see if I can notice some differences. Just little things up here. So smoothing might have gotten rid of, well, let's look at some of the details here. So just like maybe over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect the point cloud here. I'm going to turn on the wireframe. Maybe the wireframe will tell us something. I don't know. Let's see. Does it look very similar because all the settings were the same? Yeah, it's hard to tell the difference. And maybe that's because on these flatter sections, it's a little bit more difficult to tell. But maybe on the front, let's see what we got here. I can see that there's a, you know, the wireframe here is sort of set up like this. Now, if I go over here, does it look a little different? It's almost the same. So it could be that just the little fine details at the front. Let me shut these off, the wireframe. Okay, like that. And let me try this guy over here. Same thing. Okay, sometimes you don't notice these things as much. You can't see it in the geometry because the texture is on. So, yeah, it probably did make a little bit of smoothing, but I mean, it's hard to tell with the texture. And, yeah, we'll leave it at that. I think we're going to leave it at that. So not that big of a difference, but maybe we would notice more when you have a really bumpy surface and then you'd go back and do it again. Maybe because part of this is a little bit difficult to tell, we don't notice as much. But I often like to retain a lot of the small geometric details, so I don't do a lot of smoothing. But that's something that you can experiment with. And let's go ahead and select the point cloud. So I'm going to hit Control A, and we're going to do another one of these meshes here. Now the next one here says color generation. So it says generate texture, and then it says generate vertex colors. And actually, you know what? I think I'll come to this one after. I'll come back to it in a little bit. And part of the reason is it depends on the number of triangles and where you see the cause and effect of generating a texture or just generating the vertex colors. So let me go back here. I'm going to go to 55. This is what we had before. I'm not going to perform any smoothing, but I'm going to take this on the number of triangles and I'm going to turn this down. So I'm going to turn it way down to like 10,000, which seems like a big number. But you'll notice that the patch size is, really going to change on the vehicle. So let me run this one. I'm going to leave everything else the same. So, it's going to be equal for comparison and we're going to be doing apples to apples. And then once that's done, we'll make a comparison to the original vehicle that we did right here at a value of 55 for the non-watertight. Okay, once again, we are finished. I'm going to click OK. So let's have a look at the wireframe here. And so I'm going to go side to side. So you'll notice that upon first inspection, this vehicle here and this vehicle here look pretty much the same. They don't look too different. And part of that is because of the way that the color is generated. So, you know, the texture and the color looks the same. So it kind of tricks the eye a little bit. But let's look at the wireframe again. Let me go to wireframe here. Let me go to wireframe here. Okay, you can see right off the bat I have much larger patches here than I do here. So in terms of geometric detail, okay, I've lost a lot on this one here where I put it to about 10,000 patches. Whereas here, which was, I think it's set at about the 80-something thousand, you know, I still retain a lot of the little curvature and stuff. And I can crank this up even higher. So, you know, if I select the point cloud, you'll see that my max value here is about 325, it's 32,000, no, 325,000. That's what it is. Sorry. And so that's pretty high for the number of patches. Sometimes you can have a lot more, and for whatever reason, they've limited or capped it off there. But you would see if you cranked it up a lot smaller patches here, and better for geometry, but a lot worse for performance sometimes in other programs. So that's what, this is doing here. Now, let me just do something here. I just want to switch these back off. I'm talking about the wireframe now so we can see the texture. So this is a good lead-in actually to, what's happening with the texture generation and transferring the vertex colors. And I'll give you my non-scientific explanation here. But in this particular case here, we had a very, very coarse grid, okay, or the wireframe was very coarse. But when you look at the color, okay, it doesn't look too bad. It looks very similar. And that's because we chose to generate a texture. And basically what generating a texture does is it transfers all of the detail from all of the points over to the new mesh. Okay, so it's almost like taking a picture and then pasting that picture onto the mesh. So regardless of how coarse it is, okay, it doesn't matter. It's always going to have, all the points transferred over. Now, with a finer geometry or more patches, it should look a little better, but you can still, like I said, if you look at this vehicle and this vehicle, this one has, much less patches than this one, but still looks pretty good. But I think even with the extra geometry here, this still looks a little bit better detailed. Now, if I decide, let me select the point cloud. If I go to the mesh select, if I go to generate vertex colors here, now what's going to happen is something a little different. Okay, so instead of taking a picture, it's going to create patches when it creates the mesh. And what it'll do is it'll take the point color at every of those vertices on the triangle or on the patch, and it's going to transfer that over. It's going to try and blend them together, which means that if I have a very dense point, a dense mesh, I should get a pretty good looking texture, or the color transfer will look pretty good to the eye. But if I have a very coarse mesh like I had here, okay, where this was down low, if I get this down to 10,000, what'll happen is this is going to look really, really blurry. Okay, so if I go like to 10,000, something like that, it's not going to look as crisp. I'm not going to get the same kind of details. So let me put this back up to 55. I'm not going to do any smoothing, but we're going to try the generate vertex color, and we're going to compare it to this one here that we just did, which was the generate texture. Okay, so basically generate texture independent of the resolution. It's going to basically try to take a picture of the original point cloud, let's say, and all that color data or all that pixel information and color information gets transferred to the new mesh. Whereas if I do generate vertex colors, it's only going to transfer the color at the vertices of the mesh, and it'll look really, really blurry. So let me prove my point here. I'm going to go ahead and click on create. And once this is done, we'll come back and we'll have a look again. Okay, so this last one is done. Let me go like this. Now, let's drag this guy over here and make a comparison. All right, so yeah, you can tell right away we got some kind of a weird thing going on. So, this one here has the same number of wireframes. So let me go and try this here. Let me turn that on, and let me turn this one on. Okay, you can see the patch sizes and such look very, very similar. But when we look at the texture, or the texture that's been generated, let me do that here. Okay, we get a big difference. So this one looks like an absolute mess, and that's because we had very coarse patches, and it's trying to blend the points at each of the corners of the patches together. So it didn't transfer over all of that information from the color, whereas here it did. And so typically if you do the texture, you generate a texture, not from the vertices or from the vertex colors, but just generate a texture. That's going to be your best bet. So I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. There's a lot there that you need to play with. And I think that's the easy part. If you try something and it doesn't work, just, take the slider, move it up, move it down, and experiment with it. See what gives you the best result. But hopefully this will give you a little bit of insight into the meshing capabilities of FARO Scene and what you can do with it. Thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.